Meaningful Empowerment, written by Professor Abdi Khalil. Harari youth are at a double crossroads in Har and abroad, engaging and reconnecting themselves within their own community and keeping their Harari values in this day's 21st century, floating within various layers of political, social, and economic circumstances. However, both Harari youth in the homeland and in diaspora have common Harari values and Har to work on. They ought to communicate among themselves, develop and empower themselves to be able to get involved in their local community, as well as in all aspects of socio-economic and political activism of Har. The meaningful empowerment must start from breaking the taboos surrounding them. International Harari Media Services, IHMS, has created a platform to encourage Harari youth around the globe to have their voices heard. This youthful program will allow the youth to take charge of their affairs by improving their access to resources, transform and develop their consciousness through their beliefs, values, and attitudes. IHMS believes in youth empowerment as it aims to improve individual quality of life with a wider aspiration of improving Har's affairs in the long run. Youth empowerment is achieved through development of individual capacity and creating greater community change as it relies on youth activities. IHMS Youth Program is the forum for various youth activities, delivering and developing Harari values for Harari youth worldwide. IHMS encourages the Harari youth to engage in all aspects of Harari values, cultural, traditional, religious, political, economic, and social activities openly, so that they become a gateway to intergenerational equity, family reconnection, reviving Harari institutions, civic engagement, inter- and intra-community connections, democracy building, youth activism, and involvement in community decision-making. Without the involvement of youth, Har and Hararis will not move an inch in all dimensions and layers of Harari affairs worldwide, especially in Har. IHMS hopes that the parents should connect, reconnect, and support any Harari youth activities, realizing that Harari community around the globe is youthful, majority are young, and dynamic. They are the engine of the society. They are Har's torchbearers. The Harari youth should not be overlooked, disconnected, ignored, and isolated, as it was admittingly. Today, Har's affairs are the alarm and warning for the existence of Har, considering the youth running errands as cheerleaders and hero worshippers, or taken as a taboo to the society, must be stopped and eradicated at all levels. Rather, in any Harari circles, political, social, or economic, the Harari youth must be allowed to participate and take lead of their own affairs so that leaders could emerge from such basic youth empowerment, factoring local political system, affairs of their communities, and wider international, social, economic, and political realities in the world today. IHMS stands 100% behind Harari youth to have empowerment movements, including youth capacity development, to become viable and institutionalized in a long run. The youth in Edmonton has taken the initiative of holding meetings by crossing over all ideological differences, disunifying individuals and forces. IHMS is on their side so that they can connect among themselves, reconnect to the community, and empower themselves to have meaningful contributions to the community, as well as for continuity of Harari values. Here is a conversation between Iman from IHMS and Timaj from Toronto, expressing their experiences, sentiments, dreams, and aspirations to connect amongst themselves, as well as to reconnect the Harari communities at large. Very educational and an eye-opener conversation.
Welcome to IHMS. My name is Iman and I am coming to you from Atlanta. And today we'll be talking with a friend of mine to discuss some of the issues that come up when children move to a new or immigrate to a new country. Now, moving to a new country is a significant event in a child's life. There are generational gaps that exist between immigrant parents and their children in many different forms. This is a byproduct of some external forces of assimilation and cultural change on both sides. Immigrant parents have been brought up in the motherland, or for us, in our case, it would be in Ethiopia. And they were entrenched with their native morals and values, while us, their children, we have learned the same moral and values in most cases, but also in addition to the ones of our own society or the society that we have immigrated to. I believe that this causes a gap to form as immigrant children start to mature and take on their own identities. Through it all, though, the identities of immigrant children are shaped more by the balancing of the two distinct cultures surrounding them. So to discuss all this, I'm being joined, like I said, by a friend of mine who is in Toronto. She is an artist, an educator, and community organizer. So welcome, Timaj. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Iman. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So like I said in my introduction, I'll just start off with myself. I am an immigrant child, meaning I was born in Ethiopia. There pretty early, and my parents went through a lot of journeys. They had a long journey for them to bring me to Canada. I was actually living where you are now, currently in Toronto, and we came when I was 6. So for me, the only real place that I know is Toronto. Now, the Toronto of 1988 is far different from that of 2008, for example. So what I want from you is, when did you immigrate to Toronto, and what was that experience for you? If you could just elaborate on that.
Yeah, so we came here in the early 90s. So I was just a toddler when we came. So I don't actually have any memories, of course, of the transition. So for me, it's kind of like myself and my sister Yasmin were essentially raised here our whole lives. This is the only really real experience we have in terms of what we call home, or a place that we identify with in terms of like culturally and that sort of thing. So I don't remember, of course, that experience, but I can speak a little bit to the experience of me identifying still as an immigrant, second generation, within a Canadian sort of Harari Ethiopian framework. So I really, in terms of my understanding of identity, being here but not of here, in a sense, has always been a theme in how I navigate different spaces. I feel like Canada is definitely, especially in Toronto, a multicultural society. So it makes it a lot easier when we talk about identity, because there are a lot of people that navigate what we call a third space or a third culture, meaning that you're not necessarily connected, at least through experience, to your motherland or your homeland, which in my case, of course, is Harar. But you're also not 100% rooted in this society, because you still have that, identity, Harari identity, embedded in your experience. So I grew up in two sort of cultural realities. And so for me, understanding that both of those realities are just as much a part of my identity has been a journey, and has been something that I've had to learn along the way, that, home can be both places, but also it's sort of the merging of those two worlds that creates a bit of like a third culture or a third space where I identify as both, but have not fully experienced what it means to be one or the other, if that makes sense.
So it does make sense. So would it be fair to say that you have spent more time in Canada as an immigrant child, then you have, let's say, and I know you were born in Germany, so technically you're not like me, where I was born in Ethiopia, stayed there 2 years, and then traveled from country to country. We went from Egypt to Italy, and then from Italy we immigrated to Canada. So I know you said you were born in Germany. So would it be fair to say that you identify more as a Canadian?
Well, I would say that I identify probably more authentically with the Canadian experience, but I'm someone that also really values my roots and my history. And so I, try my best to also grasp and sort of grapple with pieces of my ancestral lineage and my heritage that uh, I still identify with, though I haven't necessarily lived it out, if that makes sense. So in terms of experienced and lived reality, it's really both. But of course, uh, lifestyle wise, I would identify more with my Canadian, I guess, background or being a Canadian because that's where I grew up. But it's really hard for me to sort of choose because, of course, even though I grew up in Canada, I grew up within a Harari household as well. So, it's never, I don't fully relate to people that grew up here and don't have that connection to Harari in a sense. So it's an interesting place to be in because you sort of feel like at a very early age, I remember feeling like I had to sort of negotiate my identity with myself or explain my identity to so many other people. You end up explaining your identity even to the Harari community because they don't understand why you have Western proclivities, right? And then you end up also having to explain your identity to non-Hararis or I guess the general population, your general surroundings and environment, because some of your practices, language, cultural customs are foreign to people. So we're always having to negotiate and explain, and in some instances code switch, or sort of take up different identities and behaviors in different spaces in a way.
Well, okay, so going back to explaining your identity, why don't you explain to me, so others can know, what is the difference in how you explain your identity? You said you explain it to, our people, meaning like other gay people.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you explain that compared to how you explain who you are and your identity and what you feel your identity is to others? So let's start with the gay community. How do you explain your identity to them?
So I think with the gay community, particularly with the elders, sometimes it really depends on the situation or questions that I'm asked. So when I say explain my identity, I don't mean as sort of like an elevator pitch of identity sort of thing. It's not like a statement that I say about who I am, but it's more so the situations that we might find ourselves in as, the third culture kids, essentially, where perhaps someone that's a little bit more connected with the gay culture might feel, well, why do you think about these things, or why do you behave this way, or why do you identify with these different cultural items that are maybe not are as common to people that didn't grow up in a Western society. So an example of that would be myself as an artist. I identify as an artist because I think that literary arts are the arts, but essentially I'm a writer, I'm a poet, I perform my poetry, and I think in Harari society that doesn't translate as a job. It doesn't translate as a vocation. And it is something that it's hard for people to conceptualize, of a young woman doing these things and what that might look like, and how you might envision sort of, an income from something like that. And so this is something that I have to explain a little bit more, of course, to Hararis or Negesiv framework, but not as much to someone that grows up in the West, where pop culture and the arts and that sort of thing, it is lucrative in some ways, right? So I think it's just the different realities, different sort of understandings of lifestyle and that sort of thing. I think for myself in particular, one of the things that I think, I guess, in terms of explaining to people in Canada that are not Harari, is also just, the everyday sort of daily routines in my family life, right? Or why I don't perhaps participate in some aspects of what people might think is like the Canadian experience, or what I like to think of as more of like a Judeo-Christian interpretation of the Canadian experience. So really kind of being put in a position sometimes where we have to perform our identities, and that can actually cause a lot of like tension and a lot of like an identity crisis, especially when you're young, especially when you feel like the two sides of yourself are sort of at war in a sense, and you have to choose one or the other, as opposed to coming to a space where you negotiate between those two things.
Well, I kind of feel the same way you do. I mean, I studied broadcast journalism, or I went to a journalism school, which is considered in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
And you were right, because even for me, it was more like, as children and as immigrant children, and I know that from all my Asian friends and my Indian friends, that, you are not programmed in a way, but you are told that, you will be successful as a doctor, as a lawyer, as someone that they feel can benefit them in their society. And a lot of times our culture, or in the gates of I should say, and
Mm-hmm.
this doesn't pertain just to gays of people, but since we're talking about the gays of dynamic here, I'm going to say that they don't see it as something that you can make a living off of. You know what I mean?
Right. And I think that has to do with circumstance too, right? Like if you haven't seen so many examples of that because of a different economy, like in Ethiopia, there's a different economic reality and a different work-life reality than there is here, right? Typically, in places that have more sort of economic liberties, there tends to be so many divergent career paths that you can choose from, and that's part of the privilege of also being in a place like this where there's so many resources, economic resources and that sort of thing. So I think that it's not that they don't understand it, it's that there hasn't been examples of it in our family or in our history of like, for example, a spoken word artist or an arts educator or someone that's a business owner in a creative field. So that tends to be something that is a process of unlearning and starting to understand that there are maybe different situations that that people here can be in terms of vocation and in terms of kind of growth in different areas in their life.
So now, a lot of people may not know this, and maybe some people do, but when I introduced you as Timaj Garad, your father is Dr. Abdurrahman Garad, and he is a well-known member of the Harari Society in Toronto, and now he works with us here at IHMS. So he is a historian. And do you feel that because he is a historian and he understands history and how it can change over time and how cultures can assimilate, do you find that in your household experience is different from those, let's say, of your friends who may not have a dad who can talk to them about their history and how that can affect you? Can you speak on that?
Yeah, so I definitely think that I learned more about the specifics of our history. My dad is also very like, I think my dad is a very balanced person in terms of he understands the third space that I'm speaking about. So he understands the necessity to also like integrate our realities in this society as well. So he's very pop culturally aware. You know what I mean? He always has been. So I never felt from him that I had a pressure to be like, very Harari and traditional Harari. It was more that I felt that I understood our history a little bit better from conversations I would have with my dad. And in particular, I think the conversations that I've had with him have also given me the context of Hararis as Muslims as well, because we also bring our own, and I think that's something that's beautiful about Islam, is that all of the different cultural expressions of it, the different types of dhikr, the different types of gathering, and the different ways in which we like, recite like Burda, for example, a famous poem about the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Like a lot of those elements of the Harari experience and the Harari culture, I understood, and I really grew an appreciation for from those conversations with my dad. So yeah, I would definitely say that it's different. It's different having someone in the house that is not only aware of the Harari history, but also the Islamic Harari history within that, very knowledgeable of Islam in general, and also has that sort of balanced approach in terms of having an appreciation for the nuance of me also growing up here, and him having that knowledge of what it's like, and some of the realities we face here, the politics, the pop culture, that sort of thing. So yeah, I felt that it was never something that was forced on us, or I didn't feel that I had to be traditional because of that.
I mean, that's true, because for me, I grew up more in a traditional household where my parents did leave for different reasons. And if you've seen one of the videos that we did, it was an episode called I Am Ignorant. And it was basically, it was a poem written by a good friend of mine, Sinat Adus. And we collaborated together, and she allowed me to read poetry that she wrote as to, you brought us here as young children, and then now that we assimilate, you expect us to also know about our roots. When you immigrated here, you came with nothing except for the clothes on your back and the money that you probably had in a suitcase. So you were trying to build a life here while still trying to get me to know about what my life could have been in a country. But the longer we have stayed here, the more that has become a distant past for me. So basically, it was a lot of older people, when they heard me speak that, even though it wasn't me that wrote it, it kind of came across that I was criticizing them, saying, why did you bring us here? And then now you're expecting us to know about our culture and our language, and, learn how to cook hulbat maraq. And so how do you feel about that? Do you feel our parents are to blame? Like, should we blame our parents, or should we be thanking our parents for taking us out of those kind of situations, or dangerous situations that they thought we were going to be in if we stayed?
I think that, our parents tried their best to do what they could do with what they had. And I think that there's no blame on them for doing what they needed to do. And I'm grateful for everything my parents have done in terms of sacrifice. It's a tremendous sacrifice.
Absolutely.
And I think we don't think about that enough, is that what they sacrifice, right? And a lot of the times you're sacrificing your dreams, your goals, your personal goals, for the sake of your family. And I think that's something incredible. It's something that I've never really thought, well, if you want me to learn Gaisnan, why am I here? Because I think it's incumbent on us to understand our history and our roots, and whether or not it manifests as knowing the language fluently, we can at least try our best to kind of understand the history. I think that it's important to know where we come from. I think it's important to kind of honor the work of our ancestors to have made it possible for us to even exist in a way, right?
Yeah, you see, for you, it's easy because, like I said, your father's a historian, so he's able to tell you these things. But for the majority of us who don't have that, I mean, of course, everyone has their different experiences, and in our culture and the gay landscape, there's a lot of silence and secrecy that goes on.
Yeah.
Okay? Nobody talks about the difficult times, the struggles, how they actually got here. What was needed? What was sacrificed? Do you know any of that? Because all I know is that, okay, so I was born in 82. In 84, we went to Saudi Arabia. And then 9 months later, we were in Italy. And then 8 months later, we were in Cairo. And then from Cairo, we just came here. So to me, it just seems like a little map that I'm looking at. And I'm seeing the plane go from, from Ethiopia to Saudi, Saudi to Cairo, Cairo to Italy, and then from Italy to Toronto. So it seems very simple, but I think a lot of young people, me included, don't understand the struggles that our parents had to go through. And I am forever thankful for what they have done. And yesterday I was actually speaking to a youth, last week I was speaking to a youth group, and yesterday I was speaking to some of the parents about the same topic, is that, we came here, and for someone my age, like I am married, I have 4 kids, and I try my very best to teach my kids the language one. And I try my very best to teach our culture, which is also connected and intertwined with Islam. And I live in America, so my experience may be a little different from you, because like you said, Canada is a melting pot. America is a melting pot too, but it's quite different. It's a little bit different because of the history of America, and we still have a long way to go, but we have progressed a lot. So my question to you is, how can we get our parents to break the silence and secrecy about what happened in the past, so that we have a better understanding of how maybe we perhaps can carry this on with our children?
Yeah, so you're right. There definitely is a lot that's unsaid about our histories. I think there's a lot of stigma, to be honest, around, some of the more difficult challenges, some of the challenges that, might bring about, for example, gossip in the community or that sort of thing. We unfortunately are not strangers to, in a sense, like betraying each other through gossip and through spreading rumors and through not actually being compassionate or empathetic when somebody's going through a difficult time. Like, for example, a lot of Harari mothers and fathers are dealing with their sons, being in prison or going through difficult times with the criminal justice system. And, there's a lot there. There's a lot of struggle. There's also, people that are not doing that well financially, people that are struggling with poverty, even after having left, a bad situation back home and then coming here and having maybe difficulty settling here. That's something that I think there's a sense of shame around that, and there doesn't have to be. There's a sense of shame that also perpetuates this stigma where we feel like we shouldn't talk about our problems because we expect our community, instead of to help us, we expect that our community is going to ostracize us, is going to isolate us, is going to ignore or make fun of us. And that is the root, I think, of the issue of not being honest with the next generations about the struggles, the difficulties, the sacrifices, because we don't want to be on that community blacklist of people that are ostracized in a sense. And then there's this, I think there has to be more intergenerational conversation. Absolutely. The elders, young adults, youth, children need to gather and need to have those conversations about our roots, our history, our stories, and not just stories in terms of Awabadir and that kind of stuff, but stories, those are kind of the grander historical understandings, but we actually need to have stories that are specific to our families. Who was my great-great-grandmother? Who, what did you do, for Eid around the house growing up? And these types of things are really, these stories, and as a storyteller, I can say that stories are what connects us to each other. So when the youth don't feel like they can connect to the adults, it's because they don't understand what are the stories that connect us. What are the pieces that connect the dots between our experiences here as, young second generation immigrants or children of immigrants, and then what our parents had to do to get here. We actually need to build that bridge to understand them better. And then what we'll learn through that process is that we're not so different from our parents. We're not so different from our grandparents. We all have dreams. We all have aspirations. We all have heartbreaks. We all have things that bring us joy. These are all the things that we actually need to start to humanize each other, you know?
Yeah, so I mean, going back to what you said, conversations are very important. And I do believe that that's what's lacking. And yesterday, I kind of brought it up saying that we have to listen to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I feel, and I've seen this, maybe not in my own personal experience, like, okay, what does the word bircha mean to you? Can you explain that to me? I know it's a funny question, but it's a very serious one because I think it's
I know.
something that's really handicapping our society. And I'll tell you why once you give me your definition.
Yeah. So I actually don't know the exact definition of bircha, but what I picture when I hear that word
What does it mean
is
to you? What does it
a
mean to
bunch of men sitting around and chewing chat and talking stuff. I won't say the actual word.
No, no. So it's a bunch of men, right? So these men are either getting, and it's fine. I have no problem with men getting together, with women getting together. But where I have a problem is when it takes time away from us to have these conversations with each other. Because it's fine for your dad or my dad and a bunch of his friends, which our dads are friends, by the way. But it's fine for them to get together and to talk about things. But when they're just talking about, let's say, politics or what happened in Ethiopia or the situation that's going on in Harari, that's all in good, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we cannot have these conversations if the men in our lives are not talking to the women in our lives, meaning our mothers or us, their daughters, about certain things. Like I can give you examples of how every time there is an event somewhere, okay, 95% of the time it is just the women in our society that take the kids to these places. Why? Because the men are preoccupied with barcha. And I'm going to put this in quotation marks, okay? And for me, it's like, okay, so how are we supposed to communicate and tell them exactly how we feel if we never get that chance to actually talk with our dads? And I think it's an important thing to realize that as a young adult, the relationship you have with your dad is very important, just as it is the relationship you have with your mom. So what is your perspective on the bircha culture? I mean, I'm not sure if your dad does it. I mean, my dad does have a bircha group, but it's not as prevalent as the dads of some of my friends. And I've seen how that affects them. And I think that's more of the conversations we need to have, is how that affects the family dynamic and how that affects the family itself. So what is your take on that?
I would say that, like, I didn't grow up in a household where bircha was common, to be honest with you. My dad's pretty, like, I feel like there's a little bit more of like he's really a family guy. So he's usually just at home with the family, and there's not like a big bircha culture. Of course, he goes out with his friends, and I don't know what that looks like, but it doesn't happen in our house as much. So, and then my mom, of course, also has her jama'a. So I see that they need that as a place to gather and talk and get together with each other and that sort of thing. So I don't see it as an inherently bad thing. I think it can be good. It can build a lot of, friendships, trust.
But what happens to the children who are lost in between?
Yeah, so I'm getting to that part. So ideally, people should have their communities and their friends and their gatherings and that sort of thing. But I think there needs to be a balance. So everything in moderation. So, my mom goes to her jama'ah like a couple times a month, I think. And then, my dad obviously sees his friends here and there as well. But there is always sort of like a central piece where, we're still here, and we still need to have sort of like a balance within the family life and the social life and the community at large. So I think the issue, and what you're probably alluding to, is that what ends up happening is that a lot of the brunt of responsibility for community caretaking falls on the women.
Yeah.
And this is obviously a definite problem. I mean, here in Toronto, we're actually just launching a Harari Women's Association.
Yes, I heard about that. Congratulations. great.
Yeah, well, I'm not like I don't want to position myself as a chief organizer or anything. I'm just a humble participant in it all. But it's definitely, I went to the first gathering, and it's definitely exciting and something that we need, because I think the women are getting burnt out. To be honest with you, I think women are tired of being the caretakers of the community without getting any of the glory for it. It's not just Harari's, it's not just gay society, it's in all societies, right? The ways in which the patriarchy kind of takes over our community spaces. It's changing a lot now, though. I do see that it's changing, but I think that it's really incumbent on everybody to be active in the community in one way or another. So what is it that your community needs? Like, we're in especially with what's happening back home, we're in a situation where we really have to take a step back and assess the needs of our community. We can still do our social gatherings and all of that, but we really have to kind of pool our energy towards what needs energy, meaning that we need to focus our energy more on building capacity for our community so that we can be stronger, because there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of things that need to be addressed. There are a lot of people that are struggling and falling in between the cracks. The youth, of course, are an example of that. And so we really need to kind of do your barcha, have it go to your chama'as, all of that, but bring it back to the community, and do really maybe even talk in your barcha's plan about how you're going to help the community, and then bring it back. So like you said, there needs to be a balance. There needs to be a coming back to community in a sense. I think that we're going through a bit of like a renaissance in the Harari community, unfortunately through difficult times. And it was unfortunately the catalyst is the difficulty that Harari is going through. But I think that what's happening because of that is people are starting to wake up. People are starting to organize and mobilize each other to hopefully build a strong community. At least that's what I'm seeing here in Toronto.
So what do you think we can do as the young generation or as the youth? How do you see us helping our community so we can help perhaps maybe our parents understand us better?
So I think that one of the things that's happening right now is that I'm essentially, I guess, a youth myself. I'm in my 30s, so I don't know if I still count. I'm kind of on the precipice, you know.
I'm with you, right there with you.
I was like, can I say that still? But
let me tell you, someone told me, sorry to interrupt, but someone told me that, they felt that even though I was, in my mid 30s, and, they felt that someone in their 20s, I can relate to more than they can relate to with their parents. So I kind of feel like we're the bridge in between our parents and the younger generation. So we are the gap. And right now, I think it's important for us to close that gap so that we widen, because eventually that's something that's going to happen if like what you said, we don't come together and collaborate as a community. So go ahead, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of distractions that, there's a lot going on in just society at large. There's a lot going on online, on social media. People, I think there's a huge kind of impending job crisis as we move towards, technology kind of making a lot of jobs obsolete. There are students studying right now, young people that I'm sure are worried about that or are walking into that. In Toronto, there's a housing crisis for young people that are looking for housing for the first time. So there's a lot going on at this particular moment in our history and human history, I would say. So I think that we really need to sort of understand, I guess, the root of the issue is not that people don't want to connect or people don't care. I think sometimes the sentiment towards the youth is that we don't care and that, we care more about, we're embarrassed of our culture, or we care more about Western society. And that's not true. I think what it is that people need a lot of help to come back to their community. And I think that we need to start understanding the psychology of why people are disengaged and really working and making a concerted effort to re-engage the community by offering things that are interesting to them. You
Like
know,
what?
if your child is into makeup and if your child is into beauty, talk about maybe like Harari fashion and Harari makeup tips and like, you know, like I don't know, just like
Or
find
cooking.
or cooking, yeah. Like find things to actually bridge us, right? Like if the youth want basketball programming, then have basketball programming at the Harari Community Center with their friends, you know, or introduce them to people in the community that you think that they would get along with. And these are ways that we can come together. Like, I don't think there's ever been a recreational day, like a community day that's recreational. And I'm not talking about with like, you know, kind of like chef and that sort of thing. Chef, I mean, I enjoy it. I'm not going to lie. But not everybody in my age category or younger is going to necessarily resonate and identify with that. You know what I mean? And it's not to say don't do it, but do it and then also offer something that speaks to their experiences and to their interests. And that's how you first re-engage people. Once people are re-engaged, then you bring them into the community even deeper and you talk about, okay, what is it you need from your community? What are you struggling with? Oh, you're having a hard time at school because you're getting bullied. Okay, what can the community do for you? You know, what are some wisdom, some gems and some wisdom that we can disseminate? Or what are some ways we can protect you or provide a space of well-being? Maybe we need mental health workers in our community centers, right? Or not maybe, probably definitely, but we bring that in like slowly, first by re-engaging and then understanding the needs, because what's happening here is a breakdown of trust. And I'm not just talking about the youth don't trust the elders, I'm talking about the elders don't trust the youth. They don't trust our, you know, that our reality is, you know, that we have so many demands on us and that we're so overwhelmed that we're feeling pressure to engage. We're feeling pressured when we have to wear all these different types of hats, right? And also people are afraid of being judged. There are so many people that live.
Say that. What do you think about the stigma of judgment in our community? And just to say, like, I sometimes feel like in the gay subculture, they feel like everything is isolated to them. And one thing we have to understand is every issue that's happening within our culture is also happening outside of our culture. And that's kind of where we're bringing it in. So when you talk about mental health, it's not something that's spoken about. And that goes back to silence and secrecy, like I mentioned before. You know, if you have a child that has a disability, you kind of shun that child or you don't bring that child out and you don't know what to say when people see him or her. So I think for us, I think as a new generation, we have to cut the stigma of judgment and allow people to be able to share their stories and their experiences, because that's how you learn.
Yeah.
That's how you learn. So go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off again, but go ahead.
No. That's a good point. And I think that's kind of perfectly sort of bridges what I was saying, because I think that there's a lot, like you said, you know, if someone has a child with a disability, if someone's dealing with a mental illness, if someone's dealing with, you know, sort of in trouble with the law, if there's so many situations that we shun as a society and that we judge and that we create fear about coming forward with. And community, the essence of community is a space where you feel safety, respect, and love. That's what community is. And if you don't feel safe to disclose the struggle that you're going with because you think you're going to be ostracized or even worse, you know, blamed for your own struggle, sort of victim blamed. If you don't feel respected enough to be believed if you're having a difficulty, or be believed that your difficulty is valid and that you're making an effort to change, or if you don't, and then if you don't feel respect and safety, then you won't feel loved, right? So those are sort of the bedrock of a loving society and a loving community. And I think that we're lacking that, if I'm being completely honest. We're lacking that safety and respect. And then, of course, eventually, you know, people won't feel like they're a part of the community, or they'll feel like they're a part of it in certain instances, like they're a part of the ritual, right, of Balachu, the ritual of Maulud or whatever it is that brings us together. But they won't feel like they're a part of the community in an authentic way. They won't feel like they can be themselves in the community. And that is a big problem. That is what leads to people thinking, I don't want to come here on my time off if no one's getting married or if no one's like requesting or requiring me to be here. I just want to be here when I need to be here. And then when I don't, I have my life outside of this. And so you kind of have this like double life situation that's happening with a lot of people. And it's not just the youth, it's happening with elders too. Elders are kind of like, well, I'm done with this now because people are judgmental or people are, and it's mostly, when I say like elders, I'm kind of including like everyone above, I guess, our age category, but I know there's many levels of elders, right? But, what are we doing to take care of seniors as well? Like, are we creating spaces that are accessible for people who have like wheelchairs, for people who walk with a cane? You know what I mean? There's so many things that we need to consider, in building a community where everyone feels welcome and safe and respected and loved.
Well, I mean, that's great to imagine, from one creative person to another. What would you say to someone in our society, a younger person who wants to be a poet or a writer or a spoken word artist? Like, what is your advice? Do you want them to express themselves and feel like they can, or do you want them to kind of just do what they are almost programmed to do? Like, what's your advice for a little girl that wants to do that?
I would say tie your camel and trust in Allah. So of course, from the famous hadith. And I say tie your camel. So tying your camel looks like learn your craft, learn how to do what you want to do. Don't assume that creativity comes from the air. Creativity is something that you have to cultivate. Just like anything, you have to study it. My catchphrase for myself as a poet and educator and writer is that I'm a student of poetry, written, performed, and lived. And what I mean by that is that I am a student in every sense of the word, and I'm a lifelong student in what I love to do. So we really have to, sometimes people don't take the arts seriously. And I have seen people that take the stage and they're not ready, they're not seasoned in their craft, and you can tell. And unfortunately, that might lead to, a missed opportunity or a beautiful, fulfilling career doing that. As with any business or entrepreneurial goal, it takes a little bit more time than getting a conventional sort of a 9-to-5 job. So as creatives, we really need to cultivate our gifts. Creativity and inspiration doesn't just fall from the sky. We really need to study our craft. I always say, like, my tagline is that I'm a student of poetry, written, performed, and lived. And what I mean by that is that it's really important to be a lifelong student of what you want to do. A lot of the times people think that creative jobs or creativity in general is something that you don't need to work towards, that is, you either got it or you don't. And I would say that that's a fallacy. It's true that there are gifts. Some people, it comes a little bit more fluently, or they have a little bit of the passion for it, or the drive for it within them, and the talent. But you really need to kind of understand all aspects of that. So even if you're talented, you need to cultivate that. You need to study and learn from people. You need to prepare yourself. You also need to cultivate the business savvy. If you're going to be an artist, especially if you want to be a full-time artist, you are creative, you need to have the business savvy. You need to understand marketing and your audience, and so many different things that come with that. Taxes, you know what I mean? And then you have to also, another aspect of tying your camel is having a sound financial plan. So, you might find that you need to diversify your income. So for example, for me, I've always sort of had a foot in the social services door. So as an artist, I also connect myself in the social services. And so here and there, you might need to also find ways to diversify your income if you're not finding that you're kind of taking off just as an artist or just as a creative. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're kind of moving in this direction where we're now entering what's called a gig economy, meaning that a lot of jobs now are looking for creative people. So really, as Hararis, we need to change our mentality, because as robotics and artificial intelligence progresses, and a lot of, like I said earlier, jobs become obsolete, we need to start thinking about what is it that makes us different from a robot? What is it that makes us human? And how can we cultivate those gifts and creativity is going to be a big theme. Creativity and people helping other people, right? So service jobs, right? So creativity, it's going to be huge in the future. The arts is going to be huge in the future. So I would say to all the parents out there who think, oh no, my daughter wants to be a graphic designer, or oh no, my son wants to be a writer, that is actually really, there are going to be so many more opportunities for your child who is creative and who has those types of dreams. So I would say cultivate it. Always make sure you're okay financially so that you can make a livelihood, because really that's the root of what makes you feel like you have dignity and that you're okay and safe and all of that. And then always, just believe in yourself and trust in Allah. Then Allah will always provide for you if you work hard and you tie your camel. So yeah, that's my advice.
Oh, very good, Timaj. So I know you touched on it, but quickly, if you could just tell or speak to the parents and just speak to them and about the choices they put forth on their kids and how it should be kind of free for them to choose, and that it is okay, even in our society.
I think, this goes back to the trust part. Like, we need to trust more in our young people, that they know what they're doing, as long as what they're hoping to do is in line with their values and with Islamic values, and of course they're not harming anyone in the process, then they really should be free to choose something that they feel is going to allow them to live a fulfilling life. We spend most of our lives, most of our waking hours at work. And if someone feels, disengaged or uninspired at their job, that can be a big stressor. And I'm not saying that everyone has to have the highest level of passion and engagement in their work life. Sometimes you find that outside of your work life, and that's okay. But for people that feel a very strong calling towards the career where, they know that that's their passion and they're so certain, it's really, really discouraging and really can be demoralizing to hear, well, you can't do that because you have to be a doctor or an engineer or this, or you're going to, make us proud by being all of these other things, and anything and everything except what you want to do, right? I don't think that that's fair to put that kind of pressure on our children when they're already dealing with so much external pressures, so many things that are calling them away from Islam, calling them away from their cultural and heritage, cultural identity and heritage. We don't want to push them even further to the peripheries within the household and within our communities by saying that they can't be who they are.
Well, you know what? You have to thank your dad and your mom for me, because, by allowing you as a person in our society, I think you're a very valuable asset to us. And I really enjoyed our conversation. So please thank them for me, because, just speaking with you and getting to know you a little bit more, even though we are friends outside of this, I think this is a great example of why it's important to have people in different genres. And I'm thrilled you were able to join us. I'm happy you were able to share your thoughts. I hope that by watching this interview, someone will be inspired. And I guess that's all we can ask for, right? Is just to inspire somebody to follow their dreams and to live life to the fullest. And how can we find you? Tell us a little bit about what you do in your program. How can we follow you? How can we be inspired by you?
Yeah, for sure. I'll do that. But first I have to say thank you so much for having me on. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you as well. And also thank your parents, because you're fabulous. But also,
Thank you.
you're welcome. And yeah, I just think this is such a timely conversation as well. So it's really something I feel very passionate about. And I'm honored to be able to sort of provide insights on it. And in terms of where you can find me, my website is Timaj Garad, I should say. I don't have to pronounce it in the Faranji way, I guess.
Timaj
But
Garad, yes, go ahead, girl.
dot
Speak it.
com. .com. So TIMAJGARAD.com. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Timaj Garad. It's my first and last name for everything social media. So you can find my work, my art, my programs that I run. I run an arts festival, a Black Muslim arts festival called Luminous Fest here in Toronto. For those of you who are in the Toronto area, it's happening in June, inshallah. It's an Eid al-Fitr festival. I also do arts education programs, and I perform, and I run retreats. So yeah, you can find me on my website and in social media.
Perfect, Timaj. That's so great. Do you have any questions for me?
I guess, what is the future of this media organization, and how do you see it impacting the Harari community and growing?
Well, IHMS, which stands for International Harari Media Services, I mean, we just started. We're a fairly young organization, and I'm sure if you ask your dad, he will maybe elaborate a little bit more. But for me, I can only speak in terms of what we are trying to achieve with the younger generation. So not my job, but my calling, I believe, for this organization is to, like I said, bridge the gap so that our parents understand us and we understand them a little better. So the future for me is to bring all the young Hararis, maybe I would say like under 40 and under, okay? Because, I told you I'm in my mid-30s, but I feel like I can connect with someone maybe in their early 30s or mid-20s. So the future for me is an organization where the young people can come and feel free to speak the way you and I are kind of speaking right now, and talk about issues that are affecting us. So I mentioned this at the meeting that they had yesterday at the Edmonton Community Center, and I think it's a go. I think parents understand that we need a voice, and this organization has given us and me the green light to give us a voice so we can advocate for ourselves and speak about who we are and the struggles we're going through, and that it's okay to not be perfect and not present that image of perfection. So I think the organization will go far. We just need young people to kind of come on board with us so we can make this work. So for everyone that's watching, I wish and I hope that you will join us at IHMS, International Harari Media Services, so that we can talk about our issues and talk about the Harari experience as an immigrant or as someone who was born in Harare or Ethiopia or Addis Ababa, and even discuss the differences of growing up in Atlanta versus being a Harari community member in Toronto versus being someone in Edmonton, because each state and province probably has their own challenges, and I think if we get together and we talk about those challenges, maybe we can help each other overcome these. So that's my ultimate goal for IHMS on the youth side. So, even for your parents, just have them join IHMS, have them subscribe to our channel, because they do talk about a lot of the things that, like we said, are important to our parents, but we may not necessarily feel like it's important to us the way it is important to them. So we do discuss a lot of things about what's going on in Harar, how we can help those in Harar. So I think it's a very multi-generational organization, and for our parents, it's great. But I think if we have more conversations like this, like the one me and you are having, honest and open conversations, I think we will be able to go far. And I really thank those who are, at the heads of this organization for giving us this opportunity. I myself, as part of my contribution, I am trying to start a cooking show online. I saw that your group followed me today. Thank you too much.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm very excited.
Luminous Fest and East Afro Eats
Luminous Fest.
Connection.
I was like, I think that's Timaj's group.
Yeah.
I was very excited.
You know, I have to say, Iman, you inspired me to start an Instagram channel for Luminous Fest. So thank you for that. I
Oh,
was
you're
like, no,
welcome.
she's doing it. She's so like, she's just doing it. So I need to do it too.
Yes, you have to. And that's what it is. And that's what they want us to do, is to be creative and to show how we can help in any way. And I think for me, my artistry is cooking.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be, I'm an artist, I can draw, or I can, do graphic design. Cooking is an art. It's an art form. Yeah. And I'd like to keep that tradition. So IHMS, I'm collaborating with them. I'll be having a Ramadan special where I'll be showing how to make traditional foods that we love to eat but don't know how to make, most of us. So I'm working with, some of the wiser and elder women in our community. Mm-hmm. And forcing them to write steps down and having them tell me how they make the treats we like to eat during Ramadan, and even some of the basic day-to-day foods that we make. So that site will be up and running very, very soon.
Your channel is going to be amongst the long list of Instagram food channels I scroll through while I'm fasting.
There you go. Yes, ma'am. Yes, correct.
Just I can't eat, but I can eat with my eyes.
Exactly. Don't worry. Yeah, right? So anyway, it'll be launching very soon. So, for those out there, you can follow me. It'll be in collaboration with IHMS during Ramadan, and maybe it'll be a permanent part of it. We'll see how it goes. But you can find me at East Afro Eats on Instagram. And I'll have a YouTube page going, and I'll have a website. So inshallah, I want more people to be creative like this. And I appreciate everything you're doing for the community. I appreciate how passionate you are about serving your community. And I really, really appreciate the time you've taken to give us your honest opinion. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Timaj. Yes, no problem. And we'll talk soon. And I hope this inspires others to have an open dialogue.
Yes, thank you so much, Iman.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Timaj.
Alaikum salam.
Bye-bye.
Bye.